Let's look at summarizing quantitative data and the art of making histograms. And the first version I'm going to show for this right here is the Google Sheets histogram maker. And then check back for another video on using Google Sheets or Excel to make a frequency table and then a histogram on that. So technically, a histogram is a bar chart of a grouped frequency table. And some software lets you bypass building the table and just builds it in the background and just shows you the graph of the histogram instead. So I'm going to show you the quick version for a histogram, then we'll look into more detail about that. And what you need to do this is you need a column or data or some set of data, typically a column or a row. I like column. And then you'll need to customize that. And the two things we're going to do to customize it are we're going to use the histogram customization. We'll see what that means in a minute. To play with the bucket size. And then we'll use the horizontal axis customization to decide where to start. Some minimum value. And then you need to put in good names. So let's do it. So here I have a simple set of data. I asked students how many motor vehicles they own, and I have that summarized down here. And there's a lot of numbers in the list, so just looking at the numbers is not at all meaningful. So what we want to do is we want to summarize it. First thing we want to know when we summarize data is how many are there? What's the total count for the data set? So we usually call that N, the sample size. And since this is just numerical data, the count command works great. And if you're sure the only thing in the column is the title and the data, there's nothing extra in there, you can just count the whole column. It says, hey, there's 206 numbers in that column. If you have other things in the column, possibly other numbers that aren't the motor vehicle data, then you would have to start at the first one, and you could do something like Control-Shift-Down arrow, and that will take you to the first blank cell. So if your data has blank rows in it where somebody just didn't answer that question, then you'll have to Control-Shift-Down arrow multiple times till you find the bottom. But somehow you have to make sure you have all of the data. Either way, I'm finding I have 206 elements in this data set here. So that's always a good thing to know about the data. The real thing here is just how quick you can build a histogram in Google Sheets, and you just insert a chart with the chart button or insert from the insert menu. They both do the same thing. Google will guess at a graph for you. I'm going to zoom out just a moment on this. And sometimes it guesses right and does a histogram. Other times it won't. Other times it will try to do just a column chart. So if I just try to do a column chart on the raw data, that is garbage. It's crap. It's totally meaningless. Delete that thing. Nonsense. Now, I didn't have to delete it because I could just, again, if the spreadsheet picks wrong and tries to make a column chart on the raw data, or even worse, a pie chart on the raw data, that's absolutely meaningless. I can say, no, make me a histogram. Now, a histogram, in this case, a grouped frequency histogram, Google decides, there's a lowest number in the list, which was 0. There's a highest number in the list, which looks like was 9. And it then split 0 to 9 up into these intervals. How many intervals? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 intervals, it looks like. And 9 divided by 14 gives it an interval width, a group width of 0.68, roughly. Not an ideal width for counting vehicles. So there's lots of ways to modify it. So once I have the idea of making a histogram, I want to customize, go to the histogram menu, and I want to pick my bucket size. Now here I'm counting how many vehicles people own, and commonly people own none or 1 or 2, maybe. So I would choose to count it to group in groups of 1. So your bucket size is how are you grouping your numbers together? You got groups of 1, groups of 10, and so on. So I think group by 1 makes perfect sense in this case. And here it would, when you do the custom histogram here, the automatic histogram, the lower number is counted. So 0 is counted in the first column, 1 is counted in the second column, 2 is counted in the third column, and so on. So the left number in a column's interval is in the interval, the right number is not in that interval, the way this works here. And you can group any way you want. You could group by 1.5 if you wanted to. You could group by 2. You could group by 10. Now 10 is kind of ridiculous, maybe I'll group by 5. The general rule is you want to have somewhere between 5 and 20 buckets. You can get away with 4 sometimes. So if I group by 2, what is that going to give me? That's going to give me 5 buckets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this would be people who had 0 or 1 cars, people who had 2 or 3 cars, and so on. But I think 1 works good here. That's not too many columns to look at. And I can see barely down here at the bottom, there's 1 person in each of those, but nobody had 8 cars in this group. Sometimes you want to mess with where that starts. So if it didn't start till later on, so if, for example, we were looking at ages and we did a quick histogram on ages, we would do it not starting at 0 probably, because we don't have anybody that's 0. So here I have ages. I already sorted them. And I'm just going to choose make a chart. It chose to make a histogram, which is what I want. And then it said, okay, well, let's start at 15 and jump every 3.21 years. Kind of weird, but that's what the computer decided to do. So I'm going to go to histogram and maybe starting at, and notice it didn't start at 0, but we might want to. Let's go with a grouping size of 5. And horizontal axis, if you do need to start at 0, just go to the horizontal minimum value and set it to 0. If you need to show, hey, there's no data down there. Depending on how far the minimum is from 0, that may or may not be a good option. But in this case, maybe I'm going to decide to start at 10. And a common way of grouping ages is to look at people in their teens and 20s and 30s and so on. So then if I start at 10, then in my histogram, I might then have my bucket size be 10. So that should give me people who are 10 through 19, and then people who are 20 through 29, and people who are 30 through 39, and 40 through 49, 50 through 59. And remember, when you do the quick histogram builder here, which is you skip the frequency table and you just make the chart, this version, the lower number is counted in the column. The upper number is not counted in the column. And unfortunately, that is opposite the way a frequency table usually works. Once you make it, then you should put in relevant labels. So this is a frequency table. I'm counting how many people were in the age 20 to 29 and so on. So I'm going to give some better titles here. Histogram of age is kind of a crappy title. This would be ages of statistics students, for example. Be a better title. Now that's the chart. I want to give a good horizontal axis title. Age is good. We might be more specific and say age in years if that was unclear. I'm gonna just go with age. And then the vertical, what am I doing over here? Well, technically I'm plotting frequencies. And this is true. The frequency of people in their teens is apparently 49-ish. So let's get back to, the titles. Now, what is a frequency? A frequency is a count. So count could be a good title for that vertical axis. What are we counting? Oh, good question. We're counting the number of students. So that would even be a better one. So number of students is a really good title. So quick histograms in Google Sheets is, let's do one more for fun. Here I have weekly income. You highlight your column. You say, hey, make me a chart. You may get lucky and it will guess at the kind of chart you want. Now, this is some more complicated data, so I have some work to do to figure out how to make it. I can see there's one number way out here in the 20,000 range. And then I have the rest of the data mostly clumped in this one column. So I would definitely have to figure out how I'm going to clump here. And let's see, what do we have? Histogram, it automatically guesses at a bucket size. You may choose to override that. So in this case, I may say, well, these are college students at a community college. Grouping by 2,000 in the weekly income seems a bit much. I'm going to choose instead to group by 100. And I have this one weird bit of data out there, which seems very unusual to me. Most of the data is below 2000-ish. So I could just only show part of the data by going to the horizontal axis and say, hey, start at 0, because some of my students said they don't make any money weekly. And let's just go up to maybe 2000 and see what the chart looks like. So where do you start is essential. How are you going to choose to group is essential. And then sometimes you may choose, like I did in this case, to truncate the data set and not show all of it right now, just to show most of it. So those are the things you have the most control over in designing a histogram. So what is the best histogram? There is no best histogram. There's just lots of different options. So somebody might decide, your boss, that you're publishing this with, that's too many columns. Fine, let's change. Instead of grouping by 100, let's try grouping by 200. So then we can graph the number of people who make $0 to $200, people who make $200 to $400, and so on. So there's just lots of options, and you have to decide which one do you want to choose and why. What stands out to you with that particular graph? Once you've decided on your bucket width, your group width, you want to make sure you're starting at a reasonable place and ending at a reasonable place for that data set. And then last, once you have that established, then throw in your titles. Give it a title at the top, make sure the horizontal axis and the vertical axis has a relevant title for your audience. Next video will be frequency tables for histograms.